story of Esther. So we are going to review chapter 1 just very briefly, and we're going to read chapter 2, which I was reading a while ago. And I was already learning things that I thought I already knew, but I didn't know them because I haven't studied this in depth. So today, that is what we'll do. My name is Charm, and this is the story of Esther. So welcome. And please, if you have joined, please, let's create a dialogue during this time. I'm learning too. I do not know this, so I'm learning too. I'm using my study Bible to help me learn. So I just got through eating lunch. I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes after I eat lunch, I get pretty sleepy, but I'm gonna push through because I need to work from home today. And I'm just realizing I don't have the luxury of tomorrow, that I need to do it today. So last week we did all the background of Esther, and you, like me, probably don't remember much of it because I don't remember much of it. My papers are showing in my... I'm working on my work too. So anyway, but what happened last week when we read chapter 1 is that King Ahasuerus had this big feast, and he summoned his queen, Queen Vashti, which was supposed to be such a beautiful queen, but she did not come and appear before his court and all the people that he had invited to his feast, and it made him angry. So he went and he talked to the wise men, and they said, you have to put her away because she will not, not kill her, just she needs to leave the kingdom because she will not, because she was not obedient. A queen was to be obedient, and King Ahasuerus sent word that he wanted her to come to the feast, appear at the feast, but she didn't want to. She was already having her own feast with her girls, and she didn't want to leave them. That might have been rude if she would have, but anyway, I don't know. That's, as a queen, her job was to do what the king asked, so she didn't do that. So then it says that I read about a deposed queen, and so a deposed queen was one that was just put out of the kingdom. I don't know what happened to Vashti. Who knows what happened to Vashti, but she wasn't obedient to her king and her Lord. And so she had to give up her royal position. And one reason why they decided to do this is they didn't want all the women thinking that they could do the same with their husbands, which I thought was kind of funny. But anyway, so this week we're going to read Esther Becomes Queen. And how I'm going to read this is I'm going to read the chapter, and then we're going to read what my study Bible says about the certain verses. And there's quite a bit of study stuff, but we are not going to go back and read the background and the history and all that stuff. We're not going to do that. So if you missed that and you want to catch up, this is on both of my channels, Awesome Treasures 777 on YouTube and Awesome Treasures Ministry on Facebook, so you can get it either place. So let's begin with prayer. God, we want to invite you into this lesson. God, please open our hearts and our minds to what you want to teach us about your word. And please remove me and replace me with the Holy Spirit. And in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, so let's begin reading. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom." Wow, he had a vast kingdom too. His kingdom wasn't just some little small kingdom. It's huge. We read about that last week. Sorry. That they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the citadel, into the women's quarters under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparations be given them, I guess kind of like makeup and stuff. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. In Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So he took her in as his own daughter. And I always thought that Mordecai was the uncle, but it actually says his uncle's daughter. Anyway, he brought her up as his own daughter. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her for the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. So it is said that Esther was among the most beautiful women in the Bible. There are several. There was Sarah, there was Esther, there was Ruth. There were several that are said that they were women that were so beautiful. But this Haggai, she found his favor. He liked her, and he apparently preferred her, and she got things that the other women didn't get. So it says, Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Each young woman's turn came up to go in to King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months' preparation, according to the regulations for the women. For thus were the days of their preparation apportioned, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Thus prepared each young woman, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening and in the morning, she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch who kept the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. Now, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Hegai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. So the next part says Mordecai discovers a plot, and we're nearly through with chapter 2, and then we'll go in and we'll read what the study part of this says. It will explain a lot of things that we don't know because we don't know this culture. That's one thing I really like about this study Bible. So it says, when virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And it is written that the book of the it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So the two instigators that wanted to kill the king, Mordecai saved the king by telling Esther, and she told him. So not only does she have favor with the king, but she has saved his life, apparently. So let's see what the study part says about this. Starting in 2:3, it says, fathers may not have brought their daughters voluntarily to the palace. Historical sources attest that the harems of the two other Persian kings, Darius II and Artaxerxes II, were replenished by a mass gathering of virgins from throughout the empire. I guess they took them by force from their families. So it says Mordecai is the Hebrew form of his Babylonian name, which contained the name of Marduk, the state god of Babylon. The common practice during the diaspora was to give an individual both a Babylonian and Hebrew name. In an undated document, possibly from the reign of Ahasuerus, an official from Susa named Marduka, who may be his same Mordecai, is mentioned. The first mention of the Jews in the book links this story to the history of Israel. The term Jew was used of the Israelites from the time of the exile. What says, see Joshua terminology for the land and people of God. The identification of Mordecai as a descendant of Kish, a Benjamite, reminds those familiar with the Bible of Israel's first king Saul, who was also introduced as a Benjamite and the son of Kish. 1 Samuel 9:1, 14:51. If Kish in both books refers to the same person, then it is being used as an ancestral family name. Otherwise, there may have been two men named Kish, one the father of Saul, the other a more recent ancestor of Mordecai. This genealogy sets the stage for the conflict that is to arise between Mordecai and Haman. It says, for Jeconiah, the kings with two names. Okay, there wasn't much on that. Hadassah, meaning myrtle, is Esther's Hebrew name. The myrtle plant was used metaphorically in the Old Testament to symbolize the Lord's forgiveness and acceptance of his people. Her Babylonian name, Esther, is star, may be a form of the name Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess of love and war. So a lot of these Israelites were taken in captivity to Babylon, and when they were named, they have Babylonian and Hebrew names. So that's interesting. So in 2:12, it says, whatever she desired may have been clothing and jewelry, which the young women in this process may have been allowed to keep as a wedding gift from the king. And 2:13, the ancient beauty process referred to as 6 months with perfumes has been illuminated by the archaeological find of a cosmetic burner from this period. During the Persian period, and even among some Arabian tribes in this century, women would build a small charcoal fire pit in the floor. A fragrant oil such as that from sandalwood, cloves, myrrh, or rose would be placed in the cosmetic burner and heated in the fire. The women would crouch naked over the burner with their robe draped over her head and body as a form of a tent. As she perspired, her open pores absorbed the fragrance of the oil. By the time the fire burned out, her skin and clothing would be thoroughly perfumed. Aromatic oils and spices were Persia's major export. I don't think I would like that. I don't think I would like doing that. The two different parts of the harem mentioned are the houses of the women and the second house of the women. The virgins were kept in the first area of the harem. After a woman had sexual relations with the king, she was moved to the second area of the harem where the king's offspring were reared. From this area, she would never depart, even to other areas of the palace, unless the king summoned her to his presence by name. Both parts were securely guarded by eunuchs. The king's living quarters in the royal palace were separate from the harem, but were within the same heavily guarded royal compound. Sorry, I can't talk this afternoon. The month of Tebeth corresponds to December through January in the modern calendar. See chart, the Jewish sacred calendar. The 7th year of his reign would be December 480 BC or January 479 BC, and some 4 years after Vashti was deposed. See Esther 1:3. The king was occupied during these years by his disastrous war with Greece. The grace and favor Esther received from the king hinted at the influential role she would play. According to the Jewish Talmud, Esther was one of the 4 most beautiful women who ever lived, along with Rahab, Sarah, Abigail, and evidently the king had no desire to look further for a queen after he had seen Esther. Yes, I've read that before, that Esther was among the 4 most beautiful women in the Bible. So it says a holiday implies that more than release from work, it may include the freeing of slaves, the forgiving of debt, and the remission of tribute or military service. And 2:20, Esther continued to listen and be obedient to Mordecai, even as the queen. For Esther to obey Mordecai's instruction to conceal her identity as a Jew, she would have had to eat, dress, and live in ways that probably would have violated Jewish ceremonial law. Interestingly, the Septuagint, that's a hard word to say, adds a statement that Mordecai told Esther to fear God and to perform his commandments. The Bible does not evaluate or command her behavior in the Persian court in a direct way. Mordecai sat within the king's gate. The phrase does not refer to a leisurely pastime, but means Mordecai had gained an official position within the court of the king. Much administrative and judicial business was conducted in the gate, which was a large building forming the entrance to the royal compound. Mordecai's position gave him access to much of the royal compound, but not to the harem or the palace. So, Mordecai already had a position to where he was on the ground and he could kind of keep up with what was going on with Esther. So Esther became queen. That will be our highlight of chapter 2. And I want to read something I love about my study Bible is that there are additional things, additional historical things. So I'm going to read this. It says, adoption, chosen children. In the process of adoption, an individual, whether relative or not, assumes parental responsibility for the child of another. As Mordecai adopted his young relative Esther after the death of her parents, Joseph adopted Jesus to be recognized as his own son in the eyes of God and man. This gave all legal inheritance rights traceable through Joseph to Jesus, Matthew 1:1 through 25, assigning to him legal claim to the Davidic throne. Spiritually, we are the children of God by adoption, just as Jesus was the child of Joseph by adoption. This process of adoption gives to the one adopted full family standing and rights. Romans 8:15 through 17. This transaction is divinely authorized, God-blessed, and legally binding means for adding to the family unit and passing on the family inheritance. Galatians 4:5, Ephesians 1:5. Though the Bible does not present explicit legal process or rights and responsibilities demanded for adoption, Old Testament examples are found. Esther's adoption by Mordecai, Esther 2:15, Moses by Pharaoh's daughter, Exodus 2:10, in addition to the use of the adoption motive in explaining God's relationship. Oh, my phone is dying. No. Hang on, YouTube. I'll try to get it plugged in before it dies. This is not good planning on my part. Sorry, Facebook. It's an emergency. I gotta charge my phone emergency. I'm at 4%. Maybe it will stay. Okay, so back to reading. If I lose you, YouTube, you'll have to go and finish on Facebook. Okay. All right. Where am I? In addition to the use of the adoption motif in explaining God's relationship to his people, Israel, Deuteronomy 14:2, in the New Testament, adoption describes the believer's relationship with the Lord. Galatians 4:3-7, Ephesians 1:1-6. When a woman, it just died. When a woman